Welcome everybody and very good morning to everyone. Thank you for joining us for day 2 of the Energy Storage Summit. We've got another jam-packed day of content coming up for you. We're starting with a panel around how we can scale up storage in order to hit net zero scenarios. But before we get into that, just wanted to give you a reminder that all of the live content that you see today will be recorded and on demand. So if you miss anything, don't worry, you'll be able to have access to this for the next couple of weeks. We'll also have live support running throughout the day, so please reach out if you're having any trouble, and we'll get back to you. So today for the event, we'll be focusing on disruptive technologies and long duration storage applications. We'll also be running a couple of interactive workshops hosted by our Diamond and Platinum sponsors in the afternoon. 2 of these hosted by Wärtsilä and EDF are closed sessions. So if you would like to get involved, please just get in touch with me or a member of the team and we'll let you know if this is okay. We'll also be running a speed networking session today. So the easiest way to join that is just by clicking the button on your agenda and you'll be able to get involved. These are very, very fun and interactive sessions where you'll be able to meet and network with other people in the room. So before I welcome our panelists to the stage for this morning's keynote, I'd just like to say a very, very big thank you to our sponsors for helping us make such a great event. We have Trina Storage, our technology and industry diamond partner, our platinum sponsors, Wärtsilä and EDF, our gold sponsor, Huawei, our silver sponsors, Arenco Group and Sungro Power. Then we have our bronze sponsors, Carbon Neutral Energy, Lion Tamer, Centrica Business Solutions, Saft, Chromalox, Siemens Gamesa, Watlow, Highview Power, Leclanche, White & Case LLP. Then of course we have our supporting sponsor Honeywell and our exhibitors Ness and InAccess. Of course, not forgetting our partners who have supported us throughout the event and of course all of the great attendees. So thank you so much for the engagement and the questions and we hope you enjoyed today's session. So now without further ado, I'll hand over to Julian Jansen from IHS Markit to introduce our session this morning. And don't forget, if you do have any questions at all for the panelists, then please put them in the chat or in the portal and we'll get them answered for you. Morning, Julian, how are you?
Hey, good morning, Lucy. Thank you very much. And yeah, great to be part of the panel this morning. So as Lucy already described, we're going to be discussing how we can scale up energy storage technologies to meet our net zero ambitions. With me today are 4 really great speakers, and I'll just briefly introduce them. We've got Charles Wood, who's the head of New Energy Services and Heat at the Industries Association Energy UK, where he oversees a wide policy portfolio. We've got Chris Clarke, who spent more than 30 years working in the UK energy industry. I believe you're now responsible for energy strategy at Wales and West Utilities, where you focus on decarbonisation challenges across the whole energy system. So great to have you part of this discussion. We've got Chloe Lianos, who works at the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, so short BEIS, as we all know, as the Energy Storage Innovation Lead. And we're really excited to hear about the disruptive technologies you see coming up, Chloe. And then lastly, we've got Alex Buckman, who's the Practice Manager for Networks and Energy Storage at the Energy Systems Catapult, where he focuses on infrastructure planning and flexibility modeling. So as you can see, we've got a really diverse set of speakers, actually with a lot of experience and a lot of whole system experience, which I think is going to be crucial for the discussion this morning. Just briefly, of course, we have a broad audience joining us live today, and of course, there's going to be even more people on demand. So really what we want to do in this 40-minute session now is answer your questions. So please don't be shy, ask your questions to the panel. I'll pass them on because I think this is a really crucial topic. And, you know, along those lines, yesterday, the UK Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, chaired a UN Security Council session and warned that climate change is a grave security threat. And at the same time, we continue to see these extreme weather events like we've just seen in Texas, but also last year in California and Australia, highlighting the need for resilience. So not just around meeting our net zero ambitions, but also around resiliency in the energy system. And I think everyone on this summit hopefully has realized this by now, but storage plays a pretty crucial aspect in helping us meet both our net zero ambitions and the challenges around reliability and making sure that we, have a reliable supply of electricity as we decarbonize the grid. So how do we bring these future scenarios for storage and the storage deployment to life? And that's really going to be the core topic of our discussion. So to get things started straight away, I know everyone probably has their morning coffee and is gearing and ready to go. So maybe straight away, throw a question to Charles. What is driving the need for storage in your eyes? Is it reliability? Is it cost reduction? Is it decarbonization?
So it's all of those. It's very easy for me to answer that question and just say all of them. But energy storage is part of a mix of solutions that result in a more flexible, a smarter energy system that is able to react a lot faster, but also able to react on a longer term and make the most of increasingly low cost renewable generation, as well as all of the assets that are increasingly going to be at the consumer end. So whether it's energy storage itself, or it's electric vehicles, or it's heat as storage, there will be a whole different range of assets that we now need to be able to interact with and utilize. And the best way to do that at lowest cost for consumers is to integrate flexibility and masses of energy storage of all different kinds and technologies. So it is absolutely critical to just making sure that we have a smooth transition to net zero. And the main thing that we have to look at is grid stability, its reliability and resilience, and making sure that we have energy storage in place to support low cost operation of those networks at a level that maintains the quality of service that our customers are used to.
Yeah, and I think you raise a great point there, quality of service and reliability. So I'm actually going to throw this straight at Chris, because Chris, you work for Wales and West Utilities. You're a distribution system operator. So how do you see the role of storage playing there to ensure reliable and low cost electricity and potentially heat for your customers?
Yeah, I mean, Charles sums up, the key drivers. Yeah, security at the lowest possible cost for consumers is essential. That's what we do now. Consumers are used to very reliable system in the UK. So, you perhaps now down to a power cut once a year, but you only get a heat cut once every 150 years. People just used to that kind of standard, and you can see the reaction of people when they don't get that level of service. So we in the industry, the energy networks industry, have really been focused on security of supply, but of course driving down the costs of that. And of course, storage is a key part of that now. As a company ourselves, we deploy nearly 60 gigawatt hours of storage a day to achieve that that level of service. But of course, that's using the existing fossil fuel system. That can't go on. So yeah, that's where the new technology that we'll be talking about later on really will come in.
And do you think, just one quick question to nail that down a bit more, do you think for you storage is a tool to save cost for yourself, or do you think actually in the long term we will be able to pass down costs to the customer? Because generally the energy transition, I mean, at least for a lot of people, is actually raising the cost of electricity. Now, whether that's true or not, that's something we can maybe discuss. But if you're deploying that storage, do you think that will filter down to customers, or is this ultimately an infrastructure benefit?
No, of course it will. The consumer pays for the whole energy system, whether that's the commodity, the networks, their own appliances, and that's certainly how we look at it as a system operator. And that's what a whole energy system means. And that's where Charles absolutely right. It's not just about storage, it's also about things like flexibility, matching supply and demand, seasonality, all of those things. And they all have to come together in a neat package. And this isn't easy. We've had the easy route in the past of using huge piles of coal as our storage. Those have gone or virtually gone. Now we're using quantities of gas. That's going. Certainly natural gas. The consumer pays for all of this, and that's what we've got to understand. There are no free solutions, but actually our role has always been, and of course we've been regulated to be offering the lowest possible cost to the consumer. But that now means, the whole industry working together. The type of appliance you buy will influence what network you need, or what generation you need, and what storage you need. So those things, as Charles mentioned, are all linking together now.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great point, and I think that linking of different parts of the energy system, I think that takes me straight on to to you, Alex, because I think you look at both infrastructure planning and flexibility modeling. So actually touching up on really all crucial elements of the system and the role that storage can play for that. So how do you look at this? How do you model the role of storage as part of our future energy system?
Yeah, so it essentially is pretty hard to do. But if you were to try and categorize it into different areas, you'd start with things around the market horizon, the time horizon, in terms of, are you going to look at storage in the near-term markets, maybe medium-term markets, or are you going to look right into the future and look at towards 2050 and what role storage can play there? And then in terms of how you model it, there are kind of two fundamental ways you can do it. There's optimization, where you're saying, okay, if you're going to get the least cost system, what does that look like? Or you can try to simulate it, where you kind of extrapolate what's happening now into future scenarios, and you don't have that perfect foresight of what might happen in the future. And then you can look at different network levels. So storage, like right now we have quite centralized storage solutions, but in the future, storage is likely to have some behind the meter, some on distribution networks, some on transmission networks, and you've got to be able to represent those interactions between different network levels. Then you've got your energy vectors, and I think this is a really crucial one for our system, because as we're diversing away from gas heating and towards different forms of heating, whether that be district heating or whether that be hydrogen or more electrification, you're going to have more interactions between networks, and that flexibility between networks is going to be key. And then you've got the spatial scale, in terms of sometimes it's very valid to look at storage and model storage on a kind of a locality, but then you've also got to try and translate that onto a national system. And then you've got your temporal granularity. So storage is going to be needed at second by second level, as well as seasonal and maybe even inter-year level. So those are the different categories you've got to think about when representing storage, and there's different ways you can do it for different questions that you're trying to answer.
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe that element you mentioned there in terms of different technologies across heat, across electricity, maybe just a brief, this goes over to Chloe on this, because I know you're looking a lot at different disruptive technologies, and we'll get onto some of the specifics later on, but how do you see different technologies playing into that kind of system modeling that Alex just mentioned?
Well, it's an interesting one, and I'm glad to hear that everyone's talking about the mix of technologies that we need, because that's definitely the position we come from, is that there's going to be a jigsaw of lots of different technologies coming together, and that's the work that we do within our net zero innovation portfolio that's upcoming, and also our existing energy innovation portfolios that we look to spread across lots of different technologies. It's difficult to predict the right mix of technologies, particularly because of the uncertainties and how other sectors, such as heat, will decarbonise. However, we do recognise that longer duration storage can contribute to wider system transformation. We've talked about that coupling there. Alex, you've mentioned that directly. For example, if heat was electrified, to shift the seasonal swings in demand from the gas to the electricity system. But we do need to keep in mind as well that the requirement for disruptive storage technologies, the different mix of technologies, will also depend on the generation mix and the amount of shorter term flexibility, if we are thinking about that longer term flexibility here too. I just wanted to come back to one of your initial questions there to Charles and Chris quickly, if you don't mind, about the role of storage in terms of reliability, cost reduction and decarbonisation. And I would agree with them that it's a mix across it, but I just wanted to flag some recent modelling that we put in our energy white paper published late last year, showing that flexible technologies such as storage, demand side response and interconnection, again, bringing in that theme about there needing to be a spread, could unlock savings of £6 to £12 billion per year by 2050. So we can see that it is, again, that cost reduction focus, perhaps from a net zero, achieving net zero perspective, that is helping drive this mix of technologies come to commercialization.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a crucial point. And, I think the cost reduction, especially in the UK context, I think is pretty important. But I think at the same time, what we've seen, let's take a little discourse over to the US, what we've just seen in Texas, where electricity prices are extremely low. But we've just seen the huge outages because it comes at a cost for maintaining the the networks and the energy system. And we've just had a question come through here from the audience as well. And maybe throw this to Chris first, because you probably have the most on-hand experience. But how can storage, both let's say battery electricity storage, help ensure reliability, but also other types of storage? Because in Texas, it's not just an electricity crisis; it's a heating crisis, it's a water crisis, and I know it's very different to the UK context. But yeah, just kind of bring in the reliability element there, Chris. How crucial is that role, and how can it help balance the grid?
Yeah, so clearly, what we're seeing in Texas is part of climate change, I guess. Climate change doesn't mean necessarily warmer winters, etc., and wetter summers. It means more extremes, and those extremes could equally come to the UK. And therefore, we shouldn't necessarily just be planning for warmer winters, because that could happen. So, yeah, I think that link is already happening in the UK between particularly heat and power generation. At any one time now, we are finding the demand on the gas grid being driven by electricity generation, even in the summer, not necessarily by the sort of traditional heat technologies, etc. So we do know everything is interlinked, and now we don't in Wales West we don't talk about power cuts. We now talk about heat, power and transport cuts, because when one goes down, they all go down in future. So I think making sure that the resilience is there in the future, and we've got a great track record in the UK of having good resilience. Things do happen. We do have issues right across with interconnectors. We've seen interconnectors both on gas pipelines and electricity interconnectors go down with faults in recent years. So the resilience is there. I don't want to embarrass Chloe, but BEIS do a great job in rounding us up and making sure that all those plans are in place. For the challenge, of course, for ourselves in the energy networks, and it's right at the front of our agenda, is to make sure as we decarbonise, we don't see a sort of a loss of resilience as we go along. And David, who's asked that question, that sort of question is being asked. How resilient will the future technologies be? And effectively, do you need more of them? Do you effectively need to duplicate or make sure you've got what we call N-1 and so forth, so that you're actually planning for a loss of supply?
Absolutely, and maybe we've got straight on a follow-on question here, and I'm happy for any of you to actually take this, because we're talking about this topic of resiliency, and especially on the distribution network. So do you guys believe that existing distribution network infrastructure is one of the biggest barriers to scaling up storage? I think he is talking about reinforcement requires a slower scale up, obviously existing regulation being a barrier. So given the importance of resiliency, do you guys think, and happy for anyone to jump in here, do you believe that existing infrastructure and regulation is actually a barrier to uptake of different storage technologies?
I'm happy to jump in there to start with. So I think that infrastructure reinforcement is a reality, that we will need to reinforce infrastructure across all networks, whether that be, electricity networks is the obvious one, but also changes to the gas network and the building of new heat networks. They're all going to be required in future energy systems. And so in order to get a kind of a good level of balancing across that system, each one of those is going to be built, and there's no going, and infrastructure takes a long time to build, so it's always going to be a barrier. I think the question is really, how do you make the most of what storage you have available to you at any point in time throughout that transition? And so at the moment, we're seeing a lot of focus on ways to mitigate reinforcement, to allow to allow that reinforcement to be maybe deferred to a bit later, so that we can have a bit longer in order to plan it, and maybe put the policies and regulations in place to allow us to plan and build networks from much further into the future. And so when you look at things like behind the meter storage, and that's not just batteries, we're talking about heat storage, we're talking about using the thermal mass of buildings to have flexible control of new heat supply technologies, and using behind the meter vehicle batteries to kind of contribute towards balancing. These are really important things that will play a role in the near term, but also play a role in the longer term. And if I may, Julian, just to come back to the previous question about the role of lithium-ion batteries in a particular peak period like in Texas, And the way that we see it is that batteries are really important in the day-to-day managing of the balancing of a system. When you look at these peak periods, it drives a different mix of technologies to come into the system. And so batteries will still play a role where they can, but this is where some of the longer duration storage technologies need to be available in order to support that system in those periods, as well as well-functioning interconnectors, which I believe Texas don't really have.
On the infrastructure point as well, that's just been brought in to the chat, thanks. I'd also point again to the US, where they are actually using storage to overcome some of the reinforcements required. That storage does have that role to play rather than having to put in a new transmission line. So there is a opportunity there. It's not always a barrier. Julian, you did talk to briefly around some of the barriers that are in place. I don't know if you'll be probing that later, but I'd be happy to come back to you now around what we're doing within that space. Government and Ofgem are taking action to remove barriers, reform markets, and invest in innovation, as I've mentioned, through our existing energy innovation portfolio, as well as our upcoming net zero innovation portfolio for electricity storage. And we are doing that through work such as the Smart Systems and Flexibility Plan. Actions include removing the double charging of network and policy costs, reforming the planning system, and investing, as I've said, in that storage innovation. We're working with Ofgem and industry to take further action on this, and we actually are looking to publish the next Smart Systems Plan this coming spring, where we'll set out the next steps to tackle barriers for smart and flexible technologies, including large scale and longer duration storage.
On that point, and I'd definitely be keen to hear both Charles and Chris's response to this as well, but you talked there a lot about innovation, but I feel at times it's not really about innovation, but it's about actually just building the framework that, for example, a DSO can deploy storage to exactly do that, right? Reinforce their network infrastructure, not run into the barriers that we have in our electricity system, which is, all those fundamentals, all that regulation is old regulation for the old energy system. It's not for the new energy system. So I think it's great to see innovation funding, but maybe we just need to set the right framework and the innovation will follow.
Yeah, we acknowledge that these technologies do face high upfront costs, have longer construction times. As you said, there may not be the framework there. They carry technology risks. And this also combined with a lack of forecastable revenue creates a financing challenge, not just from a DNO perspective. And we are considering how these barriers can be addressed without creating distortions to the market. And we always do welcome stakeholder views on that to help us in our next, as we produce our next iteration of the Smart Systems Plan.
Yeah, I think it's probably worth mentioning that Ofgem, which Chloe just mentioned, have announced the green recovery, certainly on the electricity networks, and have just announced a price control review on the gas side, which really strongly promoting decarbonisation, investment ahead of need, and support for innovation with a number of new and really quite innovative packages, because we know there's uncertainty. Ofgem is there to keep the costs down to consumers as sort of the base running of energy networks, but actually is offering those schemes now. I think there's about 8 or 10 schemes now coming in that offer that sort of investment in both the networks themselves and of course innovation. So that is changing, and I think it's good to see. And I've heard that similar message coming out for a number of years now, and Ofgem are really hearing it now.
Charles, anything to add?
Yeah, so a few points there. The first thing I'd do is reiterate the UK is not Texas. We are not that similar to Texas. They have purposefully refrained from connecting to the rest of the US's electricity grid in order to avoid regulation. And the UK is a heavily regulated market. We are much different and we are much more able to adapt. And if you look at the UK's current balance of energy storage, it's primarily long-term, long-duration storage. The market for battery storage has sort of grown exponentially in the past few years because the market signals are there, the price signals are there, the need is apparent. But as Chloe has already gone over, there are barriers to the larger scale storage opportunities. And there are further challenges as we go further into the future and not knowing what the opportunities will be, what kind of storage we'll be using. Will we be using power to gas? Will we be using heater storage? And will we just be solely looking at electricity storage or pumped hydro? So we just don't know what the future holds in terms of how we do that. But on the distribution network, I would again agree with Chloe. You stole the words out of my mouth. It's an opportunity rather than a barrier. The current distribution system, it is not fit for the future of the energy system, but that is to be expected. This is a fundamental shift in the nature of our energy system. But as we increase the amount of data availability in terms of what is happening on the network right now, what's connected where, and what are those assets capable of, as well as digitizing the system to make sure that we've got the ability to call on all of those resources as quick as possible. And that will enable that further decentralization, the further democratization of energy as those sources of energy and storage become further dispersed across the UK. We will still need the large scale infrastructure. We will still need the large scale pieces of kit, but we will also increasingly see a lot more smaller assets. If you look at current government ambitions, we're looking at 600,000 heat pumps being installed per year by 2028. By that point, we're expecting 10 million EVs. So we really need to move quickly on this, and the distribution networks sort of need to catch up. But I will give credit where credit's due. They are trying. Chris has already mentioned some of the efforts that are being made. The ENA's Open Networks project is looking at how do you increase data flows, how do you talk to each other in a more efficient, effective way. And government is in its smart systems and flexibility plan and its data and digitalization strategy, or energy data strategy, whatever it ends up being called, is also looking to address those issues and make sure that energy storage can be integrated effectively. And beyond that, creating those market signals so that the right kind of storage is incentivized to be in the right places. So that is a lot on Chloe and the rest of government's shoulders, but it's certainly an opportunity and something that the UK can be really good at and could export and could be an expert in, but we just need to get on top of it as quickly as possible.
Absolutely, and I think there's a lot of great points raised here. I mean, we've talked about the cost of the energy system. We've talked about reliability, and I think that point, Chris, you made earlier around heat, power, and transport, and no longer just a power cut, I think is really crucial. And I think that takes us on quite nicely to another area of discussion, which is coming really through the questions as well here from the audience, and that's really technology diversity. Because I think at the moment we talk a lot about battery energy storage, but we've already mentioned we need more long duration storage. We need to be able to address heating, and there's a really wide mix of technologies available. So maybe Alex, Chloe, I think you two are very well positioned to talk about this a bit more. Here is what is the right mix of technologies, and what kind of disruptive technologies are we seeing coming into the market that can address all three of those sectors that we spoke about.
I'll go first, if that's all right. So the right mix is very, as you can imagine, it's quite hard to put your finger on and saying this is going to be the right mix, because it's dependent on a lot of different uncertainties in the future energy system. However, that's a bit of a cop-out answer, so I'll give you some more hard stuff. So at the Catapult, we look at everything from the kind of what consumers can interact with, what consumer propositions will be attractive to people, right through to looking at how storage interacts with markets, and then through to this kind of market agnostic economic optimization modeling. And one thing that we see is that some of the most valuable storage assets to the energy system is low marginal cost, so on a per kilowatt hour basis, behind the meter storage. If you were to believe that you could deploy a lot of hot water tanks in people's homes, the value that provides to the system is huge, And when you constrain that and say, and maybe put a layer of reality onto that, saying that people aren't going to want those behind the meter hot water tanks in their homes too much unless you create really good value propositions, then you start actually changing what the entire system looks like. And you start bringing in things like hydrogen for space heating, because the costs associated with reinforcing other parts of the system are so high if you don't have that low cost behind the meter storage. So there's questions there in terms of disruptive technologies. Can we create low cost behind the meter storage that is attractive to consumers? And I think if someone hits that sweet spot, then I think that's going to be a really attractive thing to have. But then let's kind of go towards the long duration side as well. There's a question in the chat about do we think that long duration storage is a pipe dream or not? And I think the answer really is it can't be. We need it. At the moment, we heavily rely on it. In 6 months of the year, we use 200 terawatt hours more of gas than the other 6 months of the year. And so that's kind of a fairly blunt measure, but we do need long duration storage. And so the question is, how do we do it? And so if you could look towards something like hydrogen storage, or you could look towards gas storage, as long as you've got highly efficient CCS infrastructure. Or you could look towards heat networks with thermal storage that can be seasonal. And so there's many different ways you can provide long duration storage, not just through purely not just through kind of a lot of batteries, for example. And the final thing that I'd like to say is that batteries are key to low regrets future scenarios, and there's definitely going to be a really high amount of batteries that we require. Lithium ion are the front runners at the moment, but there are innovations in batteries that might be competitive, and so I don't think it's too much of a surprise to say that batteries are pretty crucial as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Chloe, what's your thoughts on?
Thanks for bringing me in on this. I think there's definitely going to start again. So the role for longer duration storage and other types of storage, and what the right mix of technology is, isn't really a position for us to say. We are technology agnostic here in BEIS, and it is really about what the need is from the market. As we've said, there is a role for storage across heat, transport, industry, decarbonisation, and power, of course, as well. And we do see that there is the need to explore beyond the bounds of lithium ion. That's part of the reason why I have the role that I have. We have Faraday Challenge looking at lithium ion, and I look at things aside from lithium ion, other areas of technologies, areas of energy storage that perhaps need a bit of support to be able to achieve commercialization. However, as I say, we aren't the ones to state what those technologies should be, and we have that technology agnostic approach. It's difficult to predict the right mix of technologies, as we've said, because there's new policies and strategies coming out, and we're not sure how the decarbonisation route is going to occur for heat, for industry, for transport still. Of course, we've got lots of those strategies coming up this year, which is excellent. It will help inform the market, and as well my innovation strategy too. But what we've heard from the market in our recent market engagement that we've had off the back of the 10-point plan commitment to look at energy storage and flexibility innovation challenges, as well as the reference in the energy white paper to have a competition in first of a kind longer duration storage, is that we need to provide opportunity for technologies and companies to trial other forms of storage rather than just lithium ion. And perhaps it's not really about the end use, it's about what could they do. Having the focus on longer duration doesn't determine the scale. Yes, okay, some of the longer duration storage technologies that may be coming through could be at the larger scale. We know, without picking anything here, we know that, for example, compressed air energy storage typically requires big caverns. Okay, we've also seen this being done in smaller scale, being explored at smaller scale too now, but we know that there are some fundamental linkages there. And so what we've heard from the market is that there's quite a lot of opportunity in these novel storage areas, both at the mid technology readiness level, so around 4 or 5, they've had some lab testing, as well as at the later TRL technologies. So this is at 6, 7, so they've had their prototypes, and it is opportunity to now demonstrate this further out and bring in that confidence into the market to show that what these technologies can provide in terms of system benefits and novel services.
I'd love to jump in here if that's all right.
Yeah, absolutely.
So echo quite a lot of what's been said already, but I think to the point that Alex made on the value proposition for consumers, that's already starting to happen. You have bundled services where you have an electric vehicle, the charge point, and an energy tariff that suits your needs, time of use tariff. And there's also other bundled services where they'll offer you a energy storage, domestic scale storage, and solar panels, and manage that for you, and to make the most amount of savings for you. But at the moment, the retail market as in and of itself is simply not a profitable market to be in. There are many challenges that led to that, but at the moment that retail market needs a significant review. It needs to be looked at. We need to be looking at all the price signals and things like creating a more granular network charging and ensuring that we're giving the right signals to feed into those time of use tariffs and to feed into those propositions, so that they actually do become something that companies want to offer, instead of simply try to offer and then realize, well, that doesn't actually make us any money. So it's a very competitive market. So there are a lot of suppliers that are starting to offer those and trying to grab for those enthusiastic, engaged consumers that we really need to see. And as automation and some of the smart controls around that develop, we'll see increasing amounts of those. So there is a challenge there in terms of if the lithium-ion battery storage market may be saturated by the increased amount of electric vehicles that are available and the increased amount of battery storage that is available as part of that. But to talk to disruptors and innovation, yes, absolutely agree with Chloe, and it's music to our ears whenever we hear BEIS talk about tech neutrality. It's all about the market signals. It's all about making sure you've got the right things in place. And that being said, there are a few different things that are disrupting at the moment. Lithium ion is not the be all and end all of batteries, let alone the be all and end all of storage. So you have various different types of battery storage coming along in terms of things like solid state batteries, and other chemical makeups that may overtake lithium ion in the 2020s. And then beyond that, you've also got compressed air energy storage, which is a quite promising technology, given the number of existing mines that could be used across the UK, as well as power to gas. So the use of existing renewable generation and electrolysis to create hydrogen. And we simply don't know what the economics of that is and how that would operate. But there are a lot of excited companies funneling money into research and development around those technologies right now. So we will see some interesting things happen in the next 10 years.
Funneling money, sorry, I want to pick up that point, because I think at the moment, not just in the UK, I mean, in a lot of countries, and you know, for hydrogen, the European Union is the perfect example. A lot of money is being funneled into funding new technology innovation. And you know, this is ultimately taxpayers' money. It's ultimately money that everyone pays for. So what I would kind of just throw out there is that long duration storage, different storage technologies, they're not a pipe dream at all. They're actually technically available in many different cases, and actually they're pretty technology ready. So is it not the wrong incentivization to just keep throwing money at innovation funding at these technologies when actually they will never be profitable unless there's the right market signals? I mean, it's great that you fund a 12-hour duration storage technology, and that will be wonderful. But if it's technically ready, but there's no price signal, it doesn't matter how much innovation funding you throw at it. It's not a market-driven solution. So don't we actually just need a market framework that drives those? Because actually innovators will take care of the rest, because most technologies are pretty close to readiness on that side. I think
I'll just jump in there quickly, Alex, and then I might hand over to you there just as a direct response to that. Part of the reason we do the innovation funding that we do is to learn, is to get these findings, is to act as the first, to understand what's required from the health and safety executive, to understand what may be required from a technical due diligence perspective from the investors. It's all about knowledge dissemination to foster and grow the rest of the supply chain as well. It's not just about the specific project that's been funded, it's about how do we spread those benefits across. And it's also about informing our policy colleagues. I'm come at this from an innovation technical delivery perspective, but I do a whole lot of work around disseminating the findings, embedding these learnings, both within my policy colleagues and the wider community, such as Ofgem as well. Alex, I think you had some comments that you wanted to come in on too.
Yeah, it's just kind of, yeah, music to my ears when we're talking about the need for changing price signals and market price signals. So we've got a big piece of work at the Energy Systems Catapult at the moment called Rethinking Electricity Markets, which is essentially advocating for physics reflective price signals to try and reduce the amount of influence that policy interventions and regulation have on the sizable investments that we make in at the moment into energy storage technologies in particular. If you look, the majority of significant investments are based on some kind of market that's been mediated by some sort of policy intervention. And so although those are important, we need to make sure that it doesn't detract away from some of the true value that can be provided to the system. So the kind of stuff that we see in our kind of market neutral techno-economic models, and we see a lot of technologies that are highly valuable, but they can't become economically attractive yet until the market shifts to allow them to see the value that they provide in terms of the revenue that they can get.
I mean, yeah, I'd just like to come in there, Julian, in terms of, you know, your provocative suggestion. Yeah, you know, we clearly need innovation. The risk is we do it in silos. And here we are talking about a sort of storage innovation, and right at the front end of this discussion, we talked about, you know, things going in tandem with each other. Flexibility and storage go together hand in hand. So I think we need to make sure that that innovation is looking a little bit more broader. Yes, you need the detailed innovation to look at particular technology, but understanding that in the whole system is probably an area they're not doing very well at the moment, because, you know, the requirement of how much storage we need is a reflection of the generation mix we have, and we've got decisions to make on that. You know, if we go with low cost, levelized cost generation, but that creates a lot of storage requirement, that isn't necessarily the right solution. So I think we've actually got to put more innovation into understanding the whole system, how all these things look and work together, how we minimize the storage requirement, how flexibility, generation, storage all work together through the seasons, which, you know, some generation technology will reduce the requirement for seasonal storage. So why aren't we innovating around an understanding of that? So I think, you know, I'd guard against too much siloism, if there's such a word, in some of this innovation. So that's just back your challenge.
I'm sure that Chloe wants to come in here and respond, but just to add, to pick up on something you said, Julian, you noted that it's consumer funding that would put towards this. Yes, it is consumer funding that's getting put towards a lot of the research and development and innovation funding that's been put forward by BEIS. But the reason for that is because innovation works in terms of stimulating private investment, and that's where we really want to move forwards. We don't want to have to subsidize for the rest of the energy systems life cycle. We don't want to be in 2050 and still have to subsidize all these technologies, because we simply can't afford it. But the private sector can. Private investment needs to be unlocked, needs to be funneled into these technologies, and innovation works to get that funding to come to the UK and start to spend.
I think that's a great point. Unfortunately, Chloe, I can't let you respond to this. I'm really sorry, and hopefully we can take this to the discussions afterwards, because we are out of time. And it's a great, well, it's credit to all four of you, because if we're out of time and we're not even bored yet and could keep discussing it, it's a great sign, I think. So I think thank you so much for joining this. I think what we really learned is that we're getting to a place where the challenges around heat, transport, and electricity, and we need technology diversity to address that. And I think really what you guys talked about there, rethinking the electricity system, but rethinking the whole energy system and how sector coupling can interplay together to target those challenges, but also how we need to address and incentivize it. I think that was a real great takeaway and a great keynote discussion to get the day started, because I'm sure a lot of the points we touched upon will be addressed in detail throughout the day. So thank you all for joining today, and hopefully see you in person next year.
Thank you, Julian.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Julian, for hosting a great intro session. Thank you guys for your insight and your thoughts. I definitely agree. I think it was a great way to start off today's sessions. We'll be talking a lot about the different technologies and how to combine them, and innovation as well throughout the day. So yeah, just want to reiterate my thanks to everybody on the panel and to all the audience for their questions, and Julian for such excellent moderating. Thank you, everybody. We'll be rejoining in 15 minutes for a case study by Wärtsilä and Pivot Power on exactly how they've combined technologies for one of their projects. Thank you, guys. Cheers.